What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas here, live on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Today is Wednesday, and as you know, Wednesday is a day right in the middle of the week that I like to have an awesome guest join me on the show to just chat all things sports, whether it's football, baseball, hockey, MMA, boxing, and today I got a really awesome guest, somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for quite a long time, and now I get the opportunity to talk to him. I got Jim Mouse McNally. Mouse, how are you today?
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm here. I'm out here in Orchard Park, and I'm almost getting snowed in, so it's coming down pretty good here.
It is coming down. This was a good day to actually chat with you because there's not really a lot of things to do outside with the snow coming down as good as it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No golf today, that's for sure.
Right. No golf today. I definitely have a ton of questions that sort of span over your entire coaching career. And really, I'd like to start off with the beginning and just mention that I believe after looking over your coaching career and now, obviously knowing that you're living out in Orchard Park, New York, you would consider yourself a one Buffalo guy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, born and raised here. I went to Kenmore West High School. Really, it was Kenmore until my junior year, and then we split schools, Kenmore West East. Then I went to UB, and I actually spent 10 years at UB as a player, student, and a coach. And, I was born and raised with the Buffalo Bills. I went to their first practice. So, yeah, I've done all the deal, high school, college, and the Buffalo Bills, all my hometown.
Right, and that spanned over the entirety of your career, which was really awesome. You mentioned that you didn't just go to UB for classes. You walked on to the Buffalo Bulls football team, and at 210 pounds, you played two ways. You played offensive line, and you played a little bit of defense. Tell me about that walk-on experience. I mean, that is unreal that at that weight you were able to play offensive line and play defense as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, like I said, I went to Kenmore West High School, and I made some all-star teams, all Western New York, blah, blah, blah. But UB recruited me as a walk-on, and my grades weren't very good, so they put me in what they called Millard Fillmore, which was like a night school, but you went during the day, and I had to. So I did get into school, but I had to get my grades up to really be eligible. I was eligible for freshman football, but to be on the varsity and to be in the real four-year college, I had to get decent grades, which I did. But so anyway, I was a walk-on. I wasn't as big as the other guys, and all of a sudden, about my sophomore year, Buddy Ryan, the infamous Buddy Ryan, who's deceased now, we came in after winter vacation. It was sometime in January, and in my locker was a helmet, shoulder pads, hip pads, and sneakers. And I said, well, I know we don't play basketball with this helmet on. We went into a room with a padded floor, and for probably 3 days a week until spring practice, we put in the wide tackle six defense. We really just kind of ran into each other, crushed each other, tried to kill each other as hard as we can. And I came out as a starter, and I was a 3-year letterman and a 2-year starter. And we did play both ways until my senior year. My senior year, we played offense or defense only, and I played offense. So I did. Yes, I was a walk-on. I earned a scholarship, and I'm kind of like I guess you might say never give up, somewhat of a success story. But, yeah, it was all good.
That's awesome. And what position on defense did you play?
I played what they call a two technique. Well, it was really a one technique, which I played at the inside eye of the left guard. And there was only me and another guy who played on the inside eye of the right guard. And there was no linebacker in between us. So if we got split or got trapped, it was not good. So, And I was short, and I couldn't really see over those big linemen. So I was in charge of the draws and the screens. And the other guy rushed the passer. And then, of course, we had defensive ends that rushed and linebackers and so forth. But I had the draws of the screens, and they actually played me about a yard or a yard and a half off the ball. I was almost like a linebacker in a 4-point stance, and we had to read all these keys, and It was good for me because a guy would come to block me, and I just step around him.
That is such an awesome story, and I actually, in the midst of researching and doing all my research for this interview, I saw some really cool photos of you, in action, and it was like, wow, he's a small guy out there, and you're moving big bodies around. It was pretty awesome. It gave guys like me hope.
Yeah, it was, like I say, it was. Although back then, our biggest guy might have been 250 pounds, which is a big guy, but there was no 300-pound guys. Our best player was a guy named Jerry Philbin, who played years in the NFL, and he was probably 255 pounds even when he played in the NFL. So my issue wasn't so much the weight as the height. I'm short,
right.
And we had other guys on our team that didn't weigh a whole lot more than I did, but they were taller. And that's not why they call me Mouse.
When did that nickname start, Mouse? When did that start?
Well, believe it or not, I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I was down at the high school field playing like touch football with some older guys, guys that are like 15, 16, and I was running around. And one guy who lived down the street from me and was Tom Smith, actually, he said, "Look at the little mouse running around." And honest to God, I would like to tell you how, when, or where, but that name stuck with me right to date.
Right today, right.
My wife calls me that, and now if we moved well over 10 times, in all the jobs I've had. But if someone didn't know my nickname was Mouse, and they just called me Jim or something, eventually they found out. Now, whether I told them or someone else called me Mouse, and they said, "Mouse." So anyway, yeah, that's the story.
That's the case of a nickname that definitely stuck. Now, Obviously, as we alluded to, you spent, you've had a long coaching career, and along the way you've had plenty of stops. But I found it to be pretty interesting in, the early days of your coaching career. You were a part of Jack Langle's coaching staff at Marshall University, and had worked through a program that was going through an unprecedented, tragedy. What experience in that young stage of your coaching career? What did that teach you as a coach, and what was it like working with a coach like Jack Langle?
Well, the first issue obviously was that UB dropped football, and our last season was 1970, and we just discontinued football. So I was looking for a job, and I was married, and so for UB dropping football, and then that same fall, November 14th, 1970, Marshall was playing East Carolina in Greenville, North Carolina. They came back after the game. They flew back, and the Marshall plane hit the top of a mountain in Huntington, turned over, and crashed, and 75 were killed. So as I'm looking for a job and getting recommendations from other coaches, etc., I had a chance to interview at Marshall, and they hired me, and that was probably in February of, say, 71. So I was there for 4 years, and one of the big things I remember is one of the holdover coaches. There were 3 coaches that were not on the airplane returning from the game versus East Carolina. They had driven because they were recruiting, and on the way to play the game, they stopped at some high schools. And on the way back, a guy named Red Dawson flew with the team out, drove a car coming back, and he gave his seat on the plane to an older coach. So he was on the plane going out, coming back, and Red Dawson had recruited a whole bunch of players, and he was very close with all the coaches. And it was very dramatic how it was that he drove back. He could have been on the plane. He survived the crash. And then the next year, 3 of the coaches that were not on the plane stayed on the coaching staff. And Red was very emotional about the whole deal, the players, and it was real hard on him. So he coached with us for 2 years. But if people go out and watch the movie We Are Marshall,
right?
Playing me is in it. They say Coach McNally, but it's really kind of a story about Red Dawson. So watch that movie carefully and watch the story about Red.
Right.
So I remember that more than anything else because I worked daily with the coaches. Now, I met a bunch of the parents or the wives of the coaches that were killed. A bunch of the parents of the players that were killed, because occasionally they would come back for a game or two. I was there for 4 years, and the hometown people there were great. They had a big alumni backing. They had a club called the Big Green. Mm-hmm. Marshall's colors were green, and everybody was so supportive. And it was a major tragedy, and it was somber.
Right.
Yeah.
It was definitely an unprecedented tragedy. I've watched that movie probably 20, 30 times, and it ranks up there as one of the more inspirational stories, I think, in sports history for a small town like that to be reeling from a tragedy like that and to come back and to show that they had a lot of fight. I thought that was an amazing story, and the fact that you were a part of it in that time is another cool little footnote in your career. As far as certain players that you've worked with, obviously someone that I wanted to ask you about next, during your coaching career, you were credited for mentoring an eventual Pro Football Hall of Famer in Anthony Munoz. What were some of the things that you noticed about Munoz's game that you thought needed to be refined in order for him to become the eventual Hall of Famer that he became? Because he was a player that was, listed as a solid player coming into the league, but he's credited you, in a lot of interviews as far as being a guy that really helped him round out his game and become that Hall of Famer that he became.
Well, the only problem he had 2 major knee surgeries at Southern Cal. Mm-hmm. And the second one was, I believe, the first game of his senior year, and I think it was against Texas Tech. And he blew out his knee. But what he did, he rehabbed all season, and he was able to come back for the final game against Ohio State. And I would like to tell you he had weaknesses, but he had none. It wouldn't have mattered who was coaching him. Now, don't get me wrong. I think I coached him with some good techniques and, maybe some things that he didn't do in college, and we would refine things and we'd study and we'd research and then change the technique or a play here and there. So I think maybe the added experience of maybe a new technique here and there, but whoever coached him, it would have all ended out the same. I mean, he was the greatest player I think that ever played his position, and he was a big guy now. I mean, he's 6'6",
right?
305, 5 or 8, 9 pounds. I mean, but that was a big guy then. I mean, he could easily been 340, 50 pounds like they are now. But I mean, he was kind of lean. He could play today without any problem, and he was a phenom. I mean, he was a baseball pitcher in college. He had such great quickness, work habits. I mean, strong, quick, athletic. He was a phenom. I think maybe in his second year, our first home game against Seattle, he had 26 pancakes. Wow. And of those 26 pancakes, they weren't all on the run. This man was on the ground 26 times.
Wow.
I remember that because it was like unbelievable. Because, when I would chart him and grade him and all that. But, oh no, this guy's and now he's one of the greatest guys in the world. I mean, of all the people you would put him in one of your 5 fingers as one of the greatest human beings you would ever meet.
And as far as the coach-player relationship that you guys cultivated during your coaching career in Cincinnati, is he still a player that you talk to often? Do you guys kind of pick each other's brains about the game?
Oh, yeah. I talk to him often. When I go to Cincinnati, because I still work for the Bengals,
right.
I'll see him. He'll come to practice, or he's part of the radio TV thing, and he does a lot of commercials. He's got a foundation. He's big in Cincinnati now. He ended up staying there. He's a California guy who ended up making Cincinnati his home.
That sounds familiar. That sounds like Thurman and Jim and Andre and all those guys too.
Oh yeah. So, right. And he had a son that was an outstanding player at Tennessee, who had some injuries and didn't play pro football, but was good enough to play, other than I believe he had a bad shoulder, had a bad knee, and his name is Michael Munoz, who actually works at the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. I'm not sure exactly what he does there, but I know he's got a good job for the Hall of Fame.
That's an awesome story. And I mean, just watching, tape of Anthony Munoz over the last few days, just his physicality as a lineman in that era. Obviously, I watched football back then, and the physicality, I think, has changed a little bit with some of the rules and stuff like that. And Anthony Munoz, as you said, one of those few guys that could play really in any era of football. So you mentioned, obviously, that you work within the Cincinnati Bengals organization, and you were an offensive line coach there for quite some time. You were part of both of the Bengals Super Bowl appearances, as well as a Super Bowl appearance with the Giants in 2000. I'd like to know, just out of curiosity, I hear this all the time, and it's kind of touched on, but players, they don't really dive in deep as far as what a Super Bowl week preparation-wise looks like. As far as your memory goes, what does that week look like as far as preparation and preparing for that game, and how does it feel being in that moment in that game?
Well, most teams, you get 2 weeks to prepare for the game. So most teams take I know they all do. All the teams take the first week, at their home, practice area, whatever, putting the game plan in and doing the practice, all the preparations for the game, as if they were going to play the game the first week. Mm-hmm. Then the next week, they may tweak a thing or two, or maybe they haven't worked on short yardage or goal line, but they do not take the second week to put all new stuff in and to practice the basic things they're going to run. It's a little bit of a review because they know it's kind of hectic with all the press conferences and the media and all the different events that they go to. So, again, it's more of you're there to play the game, but it's more of a social affair the second week. I mean, you do practice every day, but when you practice, you're just pretty much repeating what you practiced the first week. It's almost like you had 2 weeks of the same practices. So, I know we played Baltimore and I was the Giants, and I still think that they were as good, if not better, than the 85 Bears defense. 2000, I believe it was a 2001 season, 2002 Super Bowl, Baltimore Ravens with Sam Adams and Ray Lewis and a whole bunch of guys. So when I was with the Giants, we played them in Tampa in the Super Bowl. We could have gone the day before the game, and it wouldn't have made a difference because they crushed us.
Yeah, they had a very dominant defense.
Unbelievable.
They did, yeah.
But anyway, the second week is more of a social thing. Pictures, interviews, a few parties. So that's it.
Now, as a X's and O's coach and as somebody that is very hands-on with offensive linemen, did you like that type of preparation? Did you like the 2 week gap, or did you like it, 1 week apart? If you had a choice, would you say 1 week apart or two? Obviously, there's extra rest factors and all that stuff, but I'm just curious from a coaching angle, did you like that extra week?
Well, there's no way you could go to the site of the Super Bowl with just 1 week's notice. You couldn't do it because there's just too much going on. You actually need that week.
Right.
Okay. So I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't just now. If you just stayed at home at your home base and went to the Super Bowl the day before the game, then it would be like a regular game preparation. But they want you there normally like the previous Sunday or Monday.
Right. And obviously, being that it's the Super Bowl, it's the biggest game, biggest event of the year, essentially, especially in sports, so they want the media and everything like that. But I always wonder, as far as coaching staffs go, they probably, some coaches might think to themselves, well, if we just had a normal week where this game was just normalized, would our chances be better? Are we putting too much pressure on ourselves? I've always wondered that, and I just thought that was a question that I'd like to throw in there.
Well, like I say, I don't think you can do it because I think the media, the press,
the
whole nation needs 2 weeks to prepare for it, getting the ticket.
Right. It's such a huge game.
Getting the plane flight, getting the hotels. Oh, yeah. It would take, I mean, the teams couldn't prepare themselves that fast.
Right.
For all the preparations. I mean, so, anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree. As far as the next stop in your coaching career that I wanted to dive into, you went from the Cincinnati Bengals and had a lot of success with that offensive line, and obviously we talked about Anthony Munoz, but your next stop was in Carolina, working with the Carolina Panthers, which at the time were a new expansion franchise in the National Football League. That 1995 season, you guys made it all the way to the NFC Championship game. What was that experience like, and how tough was it coaching, an offensive line featuring players that were expansion players? Obviously, they had an expansion draft, and those players had never really played together before. What type of experience was that like for you? And dive into that a little bit for me.
Well, I mean, I left the Bengals after the season of 94, and that's when the Panthers started in 95. And the guy that recruited me was Bill Polian. He was the GM because they hadn't appointed Dom Capers yet as the head coach, and who Dom Capers approved of my hiring, but he couldn't hire any of the coaches yet. So I had a close relationship with Bill Polian, and he's the one that hired me. And I left the Bengals. We weren't doing very well, and I was there for 15 years, and I just thought it was time to move on, even though I still work for the Bengals today. But anyway, the first year, 95 actually was the first year, I think we won like 3 or 4 games. And but then it was the next year, I believe it was the season of 96, our second year, where we went to the playoff. We went to the championship game against the Packers, and they beat us. But honest to God, we were loaded with players. We were loaded because we had a great defense. We had Kevin Green, a guy named Lamar Latham. We had a defensive tackle from the Giants named Mike Fox. We had Greg Cragen, the nose guards from Denver. We had half the Buffalo Bills team there. So it took about a year to get everything going. We drafted Kerry Collins. And so anyway, our second year, I think we were like 12-4 and went to the game. But I will say we had good players. I mean, real good players. I mean, we had a couple first round draft choices. Blake Rothermeyer, who played for years, he was our left tackle. We had Kerry Collins was a quarterback. But I mean, I think the defense under Dom Capers' system really. The other teams couldn't block all the blitzes and the stunts, and we'd get 5-6 sacks a game. Now, that was our second year, and that was the year that we did go to the playoffs. But the first year was a building year, but we still had some pretty good players.
Now, a player that played on that team, as you said, on the defensive side of the ball, a player that, growing up, I looked at him as one of the best ever. I still believe he's one of the best ever, but Sam Mills,
Absolutely.
the late, great Sam Mills. What was it like as an offensive coach working with the offensive line in Carolina and practicing against that Carolina Panthers defense that was led by him? How smart of a player was Sam Mills?
Oh, he was smart. Now, he was only 5'9". He probably weighed 210 pounds, but he was strong. He was tough, and he was low. He could sneak. He'd be like a running back, a shorter running back that could sneak through the holes. I mean, he'd step around the blocks. He'd allay you. You'd miss him. And very, very smart. He controlled the whole deal. And he was unbelievable. He might have been a little short there, but man, he was a big player.
Right. And coming from the small stature, a guy that just had a massive chip on his shoulder, he was somebody that really was, I think, the face and voice of that team, and they still, to this day, at that stadium, have that mantra, keep pounding from him. That was his, big quote that he would say to the team. So just a player that I've always loved and enjoyed, over the years, and somebody that I think the game really misses quite dearly. Now, as far as your next step in your career, I have a lot of questions for this next step in your career for obvious reasons. This is a Buffalo Bills podcast, and I love to cover the Buffalo Bills. That is a team that I've always, rooted for and been a fan of, and now covering the team for the podcast these last few years. I have some questions in your, coaching tenure with the Buffalo Bills. You spent 2004 to 2007 with the Bills.
Oh, yeah, but don't forget now, Ryan, I'm not saying that we need to talk about it, but from the Panthers, I went to the Giants. And I spent 5 years with the Giants. So I don't mean that you should include them, but if you're going in order, it was the Bengals, the Panthers, the Giants.
Right.
Yeah.
And with the Giants, as far as the Giants go, with the fact that you guys had that Super Bowl appearance in Baltimore, were there any offensive linemen, we can touch on that too, were there any offensive linemen with the Giants that really stood out at you?
Well, the thing about it is, in the offensive line, I had an All-Pro guy who ended up. After the Giants, I believe he went to the 49ers. He played for the Cowboys, the Giants. A Boston College kid named Ron Stone, a big guard, about 6'5", 330. But one unique thing, the second year I was at the Giants when we went to the Super Bowl, both of my tackles were from Notre Dame. One kid named Luke Pettigrew and the other kid named Mike Rosenthal. But the center and the left guard were both from the Buffalo Bills, Dusty Ziegler and Glenn Parker. So the interesting thing, I had 2 Notre Dame tackles and 2 Buffalo Bills guys who then came to the New York Giants. So that's kind of a
I know.
Story. Trivia about some of the players there.
Right, yeah, and Glenn Parker, that guy was a mammoth on that line for sure. He was a beast. So and I didn't mean to jump over the Giants, but as you said, if we're going in order, but I just had a lot of questions on your time with the Bills that I wanted to dive into. So during the 2004 season, which was your first as a member of the Buffalo Bills, you worked with an undrafted free agent by the name of Jason Peters, who was an undrafted blocking base tight end out of Arkansas. And by 2006, Peters became a starter on the Bills' offensive line. You once referred to his ability as, quote, limitless. You said his talent was limitless. What did you see in Jason that made him an eventual franchise left tackle in the National Football League?
Well, first of all, our ironic story was his rookie year as a free agent tight end, we actually cut him at the last cut. And then he went to a few other teams for workouts. And then somewhere, either early in the season or before the season, we brought him back and we're able to get him. I mean, we put him out there, and I'm surprised nobody else even signed him there. But anyway, so his first year, he's on the team, and he's a tight end. But he's our best special teams player. I mean, our best. This guy's 6'4" and a little bit, probably 325 pounds at the time. He's the first one down under the kickoffs. We played the Bengals that year, and he broke through the punt. He ran over the personal protector, blocked the punt, and scored a touchdown. So he was our best special teams player. I mean, he was a phenom. I mean, the big thing Jason Peters, if you stood next to him and you put your hands on him, put your hands on his shoulders or felt his arms, and he is as solid as a rock. I mean, he's like a brick wall, and he could move. So he was powerful. He had quick feet. And then, we put him at right tackle initially, and then we moved him to left tackle. And he didn't know anything about tackle because he was a tight end. I mean, It was all new to him. And then once he figured it out, well, the rest is history. He's probably played, 14 years.
Right.
So, yeah, he's a phenom. No question. Hall of Fame, no question.
I would say so as well. And to have, one Hall of Fame tackle on your resume in Anthony Munoz and possibly another in Jason Peters, that obviously the way you looked at it, the way you referred to it with Munoz earlier in the interview, you said that Munoz would have been great, no matter what. He had a great college career as a tackle, but I think with Jason Peters, it's quite the opposite. You guys, as a coaching staff, you in particular, took him and molded him like a piece of clay, and he is now, still within the National Football League as a left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's been in the league for 14 years plus. But unfortunately, he was traded to the Eagles, and when Andy Reid, made the comment in his first, interview about the trade, he said that Peters was the best tackle in pro football. As far as some differences between Munoz and Peters, if you were to just give me a quick, scouting report, what would you say are the differences between Munoz and Peters, and maybe even some similarities?
Well, I think they had similar quickness. Anthony was a little taller, maybe almost 2 inches taller, and a little leaner. Anthony was 300 pounds, but he looked more like a power basketball forward. But he wasn't skinny. Peters is like big, thick, wide, kind of like a sumo wrestler. Built wide. You know what I mean? Not that he's, that big and fat, but I'm just saying, I can't, a block of granite. So he's a little shorter, a little wider, a little thicker. Anthony was a little taller, maybe a little rangier, but both quick and powerful. It was like Munoz, I think he retired in 93 or 94. Well, Jason Peters came along 20 years later. So it was a different time.
Different time. That's a really good point. And Munoz might be a longer, rangier type left tackle, whereas Jason Peters, more of a shorter, denser, thicker body. Where,
oh my God!
Yeah, I remember being at the training camp, watching him in the first few years where he was a left tackle, and I thought, I've never seen a man impose his will as a left tackle on another man quite like that. He put bodies, to the ground. So I think for me, just knowing how, watching Anthony Munoz in college, knowing how talented he was, and then seeing how talented you guys kind of molded Jason Peters into as a left tackle, undrafted free agent tight end, I think would you say those are the two greatest achievements of your career?
Well, I've coached hundreds, if not thousands, of players.
Right.
But both of those guys had so much talent. And, they probably stick out to me as the ones with the most innate talent. But others stick out to me as ones that may not have been quite as big or strong or as quick, but they ended up being great players themselves. Munoz and Peters, they kind of take care of themselves in your mind, as far as being stars. But the other ones that came in as late round draft choices also, or, got bigger or got stronger or really paid the price, they stick out in my mind as much as those two do.
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah, as you said, you coached thousands of players, and you had to find the strengths and minimize the weaknesses in each one of them. Obviously, that's the job of a coach at any position. And my next question dives into your time in Buffalo, because you weren't just tasked with molding Jason Peters into a phenomenal left tackle, but you were also tasked with building the Buffalo Bills offensive line from the inside out, essentially. And in 2004, the Bills drafted a quarterback by the name of J.P. Lossman. And I think today a lot of Bills fans say that Lossman didn't really meet expectations. But from someone that was within that coaching staff, I'd like to ask you, what were your thoughts on J.P. Lossman in practices and in that locker room? What did you see in J.P. Lossman as far as a player?
Well, I think JP, and I didn't grade the quarterback, so I didn't have anything to do with picking quarterbacks. But I think JP was from Tulane, and he was very mobile. He was, he could run, he could move, and I think the mobility was the thing that excited everybody. And JP was a good guy. He worked hard. He really did. And I really don't know I think he had talent. I think he had a strong arm, and sometimes some guys come on a little faster than other guys, and it just didn't happen with him.
Right.
Drew Bledsoe was actually there my first year, and he did a good job with us. So we were 9-7. We played the Steelers in our last game, and if we'd have won them, we'd have gone to the playoffs, and we lost that game. And then after that, I don't know the exact timetable, but we had a few other quarterbacks, and then I know JP was there, and then it was not great. I'm not going to say it was his fault or anything, but
right.
After that, it started going downhill a little bit.
What would you say, were the reasons for that? Just the fact that there were a lot of interchanging parts, or just players that they thought might have worked out that didn't work out?
Oh, I really can't tell you. I mean, I would think that, that was like 2005. Well, the 2005. And then how many years did it take through how many coaches, Mike Malarkey, Dick Duran, Chan Gailey, I can't even name all the ones there.
Right.
It's just taking time, you know what I mean?
Right.
And who knows why, Is it, do you finally get the franchise quarterback? Do you finally lose enough games that in the draft that you pick high enough? I think just a bunch of bad luck. I mean, I can't pinpoint any one thing in particular. But I think the more games you lose and the better draft choices you get and the higher you pick, and then eventually things are going to turn around. I mean, look at the 49ers. They were down for years, right? I mean, they were up for years when they were down for years. And sooner or later, you pick the right players in the right spot, it's going to turn around for you. So
right. Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a really good analysis of that. It's never one thing, and I like the fact that you said JP worked hard, because I think fans look at these players and they look at whether they're producing or not, rather than understanding that this guy is playing for his job every single week, and sometimes it might not work out, and sometimes it will. Not everybody is a 6th-round draft choice quarterback that ends up winning 6 Super Bowls. You can't predict football as much as we try to, right?
Well, I will say this we owe everything to the fans, because they really, other than the players, they're the game, and they buy the tickets, they support, whatever. But generally, the fans that are always complaining and like armchair quarterbacks, I'm exaggerating now, have no idea what they're talking about. Zero. Zilch. And a lot of my friends are fans. You know what I mean?
Right.
All I'm saying is, he missed a block. Oh, they suck. Oh, this guy's no good. They have no idea about the plays being called, or the problems, or the injury. I mean, it's like, I got to give the fans a lot of credit. I mean, they're gung-ho. I mean, any city, when the team loses, the whole city's in a funk. It could be Buffalo, Cincinnati.
Right.
And when the team wins, it brings up the whole area and makes everybody feel good. But really, the average fan that's bitching all the time is clueless.
You said it, not me, and I agree with you. So,
I would like to say that I'm wrong.
Right. I would too. But in this instance, I don't. I know that you're right. This is a great segue into my last question for you. The current Buffalo Bills team, they are 9-4, and they're about to head into a crucial battle with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have credited this season's success on the overhaul of the Bills' offensive line. They went after guys like Mitch Morse, John Feliciano, Quentin Spain, to name a few. And as well, I could credit this season to the play of second-year quarterback Josh Allen. I got a kind of a two-part question here. Who currently stands out to you on this current Bills offensive line, and what do you like about Josh Allen?
Well, I would have to say the center stands out, because as I'm watching the games, he's directing traffic. He pretty well blocks his guy about every play. And I really like this Cody Ford now. I mean, he was a powerful, tremendous player out of Arkansas. And I know he was substituting in there for a while, but I haven't really studied all the other guys. I like the center. I like Cody Ford. And Josh Allen is a stud now. I mean, I'm telling you, I think he runs as well as any quarterback. He may not have the overall speed of, like the guy from Baltimore or Russell Wilson, but he's just as hard or harder to tackle because he's elusive and he's big and strong.
Right.
And I think he's a good passer. I think he's pretty accurate. I guess, I didn't follow every play, but I guess when he starts to scramble, sometimes he just throws the ball up, and then, that's an issue sometimes where he just kind of throws it up and wings it. But I would think that the Buffalo Bills fans should feel that this is their guy, because they're not going to go out. Let's say he has another bad game or two for whatever, and all of a sudden everybody, he's not that good. He's going to be the Bills quarterback until he can't be the Bills quarterback anymore. So bear with it. He's a great player. And the people out there that still, I don't know if is he the franchise yet? Listen, you better buy the fact they're not drafting another one. And he's a good one. He's a real good one.
You got me smiling ear to ear, grinning ear to ear with that. That was awesome. I definitely agree with you 100%. And if Mouse McNally is saying that Josh Allen's the guy in Buffalo, then to the people that are listening to this podcast, that's all you need to hear. That's all you need to hear.
Quit complaining about him.
Right.
Every little bad play he does, forget it. Shut up. Nobody's perfect. Live with the guy. He's going to make more good plays than bad plays, and go on to the next subject. Figure out something else to complain about.
Right.
But don't complain about the quarterback anymore.
I agree 100%. Well, to wrap this up, I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'd like to thank you for your contributions to the sport. I feel like you have definitely made your imprint on the game as far as the players that you mentored and made, into, a little bit of their own success story. And obviously, as you said, these guys have talent as is, and I love the way how you put that they already have their own talent. It's just up to coaches like you to mold them and maximize their strength and minimize their weaknesses. So, Mouse, it was an awesome time having you on the podcast, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, anytime. Anytime you want, give me a buzz, and I'll be glad to be on.
Alrighty, thank you. Thanks for hopping on. And do you have anything that you would like to promote? I know that you have football, camps every once in a while over the summertime, and you also do, coaching with high school football players. Are there any camps that you will be a part of in the near future?
Most of my camps and clinics are out of town, but I will work with local kids. I have worked with a number of local high school kids that are going on to college, and the parents just have to call me, and I'd be glad to work with them. But generally, I like to work with the kids that are going to, be somewhat decent players. Now, that doesn't mean that the guy has to be a star, but if somebody says to me, "Hey, coach, I got my son's a junior and he's 5'6", 160 pounds, and he's the third string offensive lineman. Would you work with him?" No, not really.
Right. You're a man that needs to dedicate his time to future Hall of Famers, right?
Well, they don't have to be Hall of Famers, but
no.
They've got to walk and chew gum, right? Just like
right,
yeah.
Right. Just like those guys did, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Mouse, thank you so much for hopping on here with me, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay, buddy. Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Mouse McNally, everybody. Jim Mouse McNally. I've wanted to talk to him for a long time, and to get the opportunity to talk to him and dive into his coaching career was a true treat and a real blessing. This is a coach that spent decades within the National Football League, a coach that is well respected by not just players that he coached, which says a lot in and of its own right, but players that played against him. The defensive linemen have talked about how great a coach Mouse McNally is, and he's a member of the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, a true one Buffalo guy. And I remember the days of Mouse McNally being the offensive line coach for the Buffalo Bills, and obviously we talked about Jason Peters, but there was an offensive lineman by the name of Mike Williams that he tried to salvage the best out of him, and Jason Peters ended up hearing what he was teaching, and Mike Williams did not. I wanted to throw that in there just as a little bit of a tidbit for the Bills fans from back in that day. Mouse McNally, I think, the best offensive line coach, arguably in NFL history. I don't know another offensive line coach that has worked with that many solid star offensive linemen. And as he said, the players are talented in and of itself, but it's up to the coach to mold them and to maximize their strengths and to minimize their weaknesses. So there you have it. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast.